Well, welcome everyone. It is so good to have you here today. And I'm so excited to be here with two of my favorite people in the world, Amina AlTai and Heather Box. Thank you both for being here. Um, and before we jump in, I just want to introduce the two of you because the reason why I'm so excited is because both of you have been such a pivotal part of my own breaking bias journey and this book that I'm putting out in the world. So let's start with Amina. Amina is a holistic business and career coach, a proud immigrant, and a chronic illness advocate. As a woman of color of Iraqi descent, she often works with marginalized communities to help them realize possibilities in a way that honors their particular lived experiences. And I know this to be true because she did that for me as one of my coaches. She's the author of the forthcoming book, The Ambition Trap, with Penguin the Open Field, and she's partnered with many progressive companies like Roku, Deloitte, Snap, Outdoor Voices. And she's an Entrepreneur Magazine expert in residence, a Forbes contributor, and was named one of Success Magazine's Women of Influence. There's so much more I can say about her, but just know that she's amazing and she is a badass in so many ways. And we're so excited to have her here. So thank you, Amina. And Heather is a writer, a storyteller, and a teacher whose passion and insights have brought incredible truths from her clients, making the world a better place. And she was my coach for my TED Talk. So she is really good at what she does because I never thought I could share what I shared in my TED Talk had it not been for her. She's traveled the world teaching artists and activists and entrepreneurs how to identify their deepest values and use their passion to connect with and motivate their audiences. Heather's million-person project has reached more than 3,000 people from 70 countries. She's the co-author of How Your Story Sets You Free and has been published in Source Magazine, Foreign Policy Focus, Miss Magazines, Huffington Post, and so many other places. So welcome, Heather and Amina. We're so excited to have you both. And one of the things that I always find curious is whenever people read off my bio, part of me cringes. It's like, okay, and not because I'm ashamed of anything. I'm totally standing in all my powers and all the things I've done, but it doesn't really capture the being part of who I am, right? It's all about the doing part. So I'd love for you to just introduce yourselves as who you be in the world. Perhaps Heather, if you would start us off.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Anu. It's so good to be here. And, I really stand for people telling their truth as a pathway to their own liberation. And I really believe that when we stand in all of who we are, that we make space in the world for other people to do the same. So that's why I work with people on their stories. And that's why I stand so firmly in the assertion that our culture can and will represent who we truly are when we decide to be ourselves out loud. And it's so frustrating to see the current culture that we're living in and how segmented everybody is and how in conflict we all are, when I know from my work and every single day that when we tell our stories and we allow someone else to know us, there is an instant connection, instant love there. We're as humans, we're so willing to actually receive each other, love each other. So that's what I'm all about.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the work I did with you in terms of sharing my personal story, which was, I think, almost preparation for my work with Amina, because Amina, I'd love for you to introduce yourself also, but yeah, that was some deep neural training I did with you or retraining.
Beautiful. I feel like you can tell that the three of us have worked with Move the Crowd based on how we answer that question. To Heather's response, I'm like, yep, those are our L3 statements right there. I am a sister, daughter, teacher, translator. I really feel like sister actually is my most important role on the planet. And in so many ways, not just a sister to my biological sisters, but I really feel like I am a sister to so many. And I feel like I incarnated to really invite people to deepen into their purpose, to find peace as a result of that and prosperity as a result of that. And very much like what Heather was saying, like when we find those things in ourselves, we can fully receive those gifts in other people too.
Yes.
And that's what I want to lead us towards, a world where peace is possible and equality becomes our birthright because we feel those things in ourselves and we're able to feel those in others as well.
Yeah. That's so beautifully said, Amina. And as you think about kind of supporting others and including yourself and rooting ourselves in our purpose, what is the role of breaking bias in this work? And why did you say yes to be here? Other than your love for me, which is obvious. But
Oh, is that to me or to Heather?
Amina, let's go with you. Yes.
Okay, so the question is, what is the question? Sorry.
No worries. Why is breaking bias important to you?
Yeah.
Why are you here?
So obviously I'm here for deep love for you, but also a deep love and reverence for this work. And this has been an important part of my life and my upbringing. And you deepened me into this work as well, being around you in our mastermind and getting to do your programs and just seeing how you navigate the world. I cannot wait to get my galley copy of your book to deepen into it even more. But this work is so important to me because of my mission, because if we are moving through the world with our various implicit bias, and we all have them, we're not actually seeing anything for what it is. And so imagine if we lived in a world where we could see everything for what it was and we could see everybody for who they are. That's how I think we get to the place of where peace is possible and equality becomes our birthright. And what you talk about is the beloved community.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Heather.
Yeah, I mean, one of the lines I love the most that you say, Anu, is about how we don't want to live in a world where we're living in the ideas of each other. And to me, that is what breaking bias is all about. Like, what if we were actually able to see each other? And we are, and we have that ability every second of every day. It is inside of us, and it's not impossible. And that's what I feel like your work helps us to recognize, is that we already are able to live in the presence of one another and to like look in someone's eyes and just see only love. We already are able to do that. But we don't have to like retrain our whole system to be able to do that. We just have to clear away the false narratives and the false ideas that we have collected along the way in our life, and that our culture and our society perpetuates. And that's what I felt that when I was taking your course, and just even in the actual work, being able in the group to just be able to see each other. You're so good at facilitating that kind of space where people can really meet each other.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. And part of what really inspires me, Heather, is when one of the things that I've always noticed about you, that beneath the pain that we feel, around the world, around the suffering in our world, you carry this hope. And I want to really ask you, like, what is the role of hope in the work of breaking bias and the work of bridge building and healing? And how do you maintain it?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say hope, because it's like, I think that is what it is. It is hope, but it's also just like a recognition of a deeper truth. It's like, we are not alone. Like, when I say that, I'm like, we are so dependent on one another and interdependent. We are actually of someone else's body. Like we are inherently connected.
Yeah.
And so given that, like, I just feel like so many of the issues that we are facing in this world is just a denial of that.
Yeah.
Our ability to not recognize that. And so it's it's not like, oh, I have so much hope for the world, because you look out there and you're like, yikes, it's, there's a lot of problems.
Yes.
But I believe that in this fundamental level, we all know that we actually are just like pure love.
Yes.
And we do know that. So if we know that, then there kind of has to be hope. And so that's the equation for me there.
And it's so beautiful because it really talks to this idea of recognizing, this idea of mindfulness, being aware of the big picture. What's known as, the absolute truth, that we're completely interdependent on one another, on our earth, on other species, on air, and the 5 elements. And we forget that, and we kind of get caught in this separation consciousness, right? And my book, when I talk about, which, the long arc of human history, like the 10,000 years that we know of recorded human history, it's really about us moving away from this inclusion consciousness, where we recognize Ubuntu and we recognize interbeing, to feeling separate, and that's our work, is to move away from separation and return to what you said, to our interdependence. And I feel like your work does that. Amina, I feel like your work does that too. And how have you noticed that in your own self and with your clients?
Yeah, the hope. The hope is so important. To me, the opposite of hope is despair, and I refuse to buy into it. And I also do feel really hopeful. I actually recently had dinner with the first manager I'd ever worked with back when I was 21 years old. And we were talking about my work today, and I was talking about my book and how I mostly work with historically excluded people. And we were having this conversation, and she was like, we weren't talking about that 20 years ago. She was like, I didn't even realize really that you were a woman of color. And so I think it's like the progression of the conversation, even in my lifetime and in my career, I think is huge. And that gives me so much hope. And of course, there are moments where our hope wanes, and that's where we lean into our interdependence, right? If I can't carry hope today, you can carry hope today, and vice versa. You can't carry it tomorrow, I got you tomorrow. And so we are so interdependent and interconnected, and that is how we rise. So much of what I see, especially in entrepreneurship and in our careers, is sort of the myth of individualism, and that we can pull ourselves up and we get there alone, and the self-made entrepreneur. And none of that is true. None of that is real. It puts us very much in the scarcity fight mode versus that interconnectedness where we all get to rise together. And I think so much of the work is looking at the core wounds, acknowledging the systems that maybe also had us or invited us to show up that way, and choosing something different every day.
Yeah. So beautifully said. And as I listened to you, Amina, what really triggered for me this idea of this self-made person myth, right? This hyper individualism. And in the book, I've been doing so much research, how a lot of that is really rooted in misogyny and patriarchy, right? And suppression of the feminine parts of all of us, regardless of our genders. Where have you noticed that within yourself, and how did you break? I mean, do you notice misogyny in yourself as women, as female-bodied people, and how do you work with that? Because I feel like so many of our viewers and listeners constantly are challenged with that, particularly women.
It's a beautiful question. I think very early in my career, I was very much operating from familial cultural beliefs, a lot of internalized misogyny, patriarchy, capitalism. And one of the stories that Heather helped me tell was about my stop moment and how I almost died because I worked so hard. And it's something like 700,000 people a year die from overwork. And that was my programming. And there was no softness. I was entirely in my masculine of, I must get here, I must work really hard. There was no softness in the conversation, and I must do it alone, and it must look this way. But in that, I made no space for my actual identity. I made no space for myself. And so I was operating fully from that perspective in the very beginning of my career, but thankfully God intervened and invited me in another direction.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. Heather.
Yeah. I think, I'm a mom, and I still consider myself a new mom. My kid is 5. I'm just I think I still feel very new to like the mother identity. And the place that I see like misogyny really show up in myself is that I am so unable to receive other mothers, like when they're down and when they're complaining, or what I perceive as complaining. I have to like hate them. Instead of
Mm,
just being like, it just feels like I'm so implicated by what they're sharing. Like
yeah.
we can't think like that. We can't think like victims. Like we can't think
Yeah.
like we're being overworked or whatever. Like we have to create another world. And I'm so impatient. Like it makes me feel so bad. I mean, it is kind of a big part of my life right now, where I come home from a lot of things and I feel so bad for the thoughts that I had during the conversation with these other mothers. And I just think, God, Heather, why couldn't you just love them? Why
Yeah.
couldn't you just, why weren't your thoughts just, compassion
Wow.
and connection? Or why couldn't
Wow.
in the places that I can relate, why couldn't I admit that I related? Like,
Yeah.
why was it so threatening to me um, to say, yeah, sometimes I feel like I'm missing out too.
Yeah.
Like, why does that feel so threatening? Like, why does that feel like a slippery slope down into like victimhood?
What and what's wrong with victimhood, Heather, particularly in connection to misogyny? Because this is so powerful what you're sharing.
Yeah, it's like I just don't want to be defined as a victim.
Mm,
And I don't want us as women, I don't want us. It's like and this isn't true for everybody, but for a lot of the women that I'm talking about, it's like we can choose another world. We
yes.
can, and I just want us to so bad. It's like I want us to be the generation that like that motherhood is part of our liberation and part of our purpose, and part of, that we feel very um free as mothers, like
Yes.
the free, relaxed, loving mother. Like I want that world I want to see that world reflected all around me. But it's like I want it so bad that I am like denying anything
Mm,
like that. And that feels so wrong, because it's not the world we're living in 100, like it's definitely not the world we're living in 100% of the time. It's not the
yeah.
culture we're living in. Like I'm just, I'm and it's I'm being, my unwillingness is just like a sign of my fear that like somehow I'm going to end up, you
Yeah.
know, stuck.
Well, it seems to me that you're very aware, going back to our conversation on hope, right? You're very aware that this is internalized misogyny, that you're confronting it. And even though in the moment you may not feel it because of our deep conditioning, you are able to be empathetic with your, colleagues who are also mothers. And it's so interesting, right? Because I feel like even this radical thought of freedom as a parent, as a mother, is like redefining motherhood, because for so many generations and centuries and millennia, women, becoming a mother has been a prison sentence
Right.
for women. And yeah, it's fascinating. Amina, I saw you nodding, and I know that there are things that are resonating for you. I'd love to pull you in here.
Yeah, especially the part about resisting the definition or the label of victim. That really resonated very deeply with me. Absolutely, there are spaces and places where I have been victimized, but really living under that label of victim, for me, there's a lot of resistance. And then one of the things that I also navigate and struggle with is I have not chosen motherhood. And so a lot of the conversation is about sort of having chosen otherhood and what that means as a woman, and the conversations that I'm included in and the ones that I am not included in. And that I feel like is a whole dissertation in and of itself. But I feel like it's important as part of this conversation.
I think it's so true, right? Because all of us carry so many, I think we're at the intersection of so many different identities. And like you, Amina, I haven't chosen to be a parent, but I am an uncle, right? A gunkle to many, many nephews and nieces. And that is a huge responsibility and carries with it other roles and functions. But to go to this idea of victimhood, it's so profound. Both of you are kind of acknowledging it because, you know, in the book, I really talk about that the way internalized bias works across our identities, whether it's being a mother or a woman or a person of color or being gay, is really the kind of jumping between two consciousness, which is victimhood and entitlement. And they're really like two sides of the same coin, because victimhood really says that it shouldn't be this way and it should be this other way, which is the face of entitlement. And that entitlement really comes from feeling victimized by something else. Right. So, and I see this so much in basically every crisis in our world, every ism, every phobia, right? That, you know, when I think about a lot of the affirmative action cases in our country being challenged in the courts, it's generally some white plaintiff who decides that, oh, I should have gotten into this prestigious Ivy League school, but because I didn't get in and I had the scores, it's because of some Black person. Right. Even though we look at the numbers, we're like, well, if affirmative action was really working, every Ivy League school would be at least 13 to 14% Black, right? Which is at parity. But it's not, right? But even that entitlement that, oh, I should be able to get in. But then beneath that is really victimhood, that somehow the system is victimizing me. And how have you seen that operate? But I mean, I'll start with you, Heather, because you've worked with so many people, leaders around the world, like you said, 70 countries or so, from the Pacific Islands to the West Bank. And yeah, like how has that shown up in leadership?
Well, I'm so curious about what then like the middle is. Like if this is victimhood and this is entitlement, like what is the middle?
Yeah. Well, that's the breaking bias piece, which is standing in our power, in our agency, right?
Yeah. I love that. And it's so interesting for me in this work. I'm, you know, I a lot of times I joke that I'm a one-trick pony. Like I've been running the same curriculum since 2011. And you know, I evolve it in some ways, but basically the same thing over and over and over again. And I never tire of it. And but what it's given me is like this really interesting kind of sample of what human beings kind of go through when they first start to stand in their story, because it's about people telling their truest personal story publicly. So what's interesting is that and it's helpful to have this frame about victimhood and entitlement, is the first thing that the thing that stops a lot of people from telling their story is that they feel like their story is like too sad, too personal, too hard, and like that it's going to be a sob story. That's like people say that all the time. Like, I don't want to just like tell a sob story, you know, but it is a sob story. So like there is this real need for a lot of us to acknowledge when we have been victimized, and when something has happened to us, or when we have done something that we really didn't want to happen to us, you know, because I think there's kind of like, sometimes there's this jumping ahead and just being like, every obstacle is an opportunity, you know, and you're like, it's so interesting sometimes because it's like in our first session when people are life mapping, so many times people will be sharing their life map and sharing really, really hard things, you know, with me. And I will just be like crying and crying and crying during it. And just like wiping my tears away, like, and I'll just be like, oh my God, this person has navigated so much in their
Yeah.
life. And then their response when I ask like how that was to share, they're just like, I mean, it's just my life. So like, you know, and sometimes it just feels like what needs to be said is that you navigated so much. Like, I really sometimes have to say, and I don't even know if it's exactly what I feel, but I have to say, like, I wish you didn't have to go through that much,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And they'll be like, God, thanks for saying that. Like, I guess me too. Like,
Yeah.
we get hardened to try to like
Yeah.
deal with all that has gone on in our lives. And
Mm.
so I just feel like, you know, acknowledging ourselves and our journey,
Mm.
like, and just like humbly like bowing to it and being like, man, you know,
Yeah.
and like one of my favorite quote, which I feel like, you know, I literally saw on the wall of the bathroom, like it's one of those cheesy stories, like life changed because of that moment, was
Yeah.
forgiveness, giving up all hope for a better past.
Yes. Whew.
That's all this is. In order to forgive myself and to forgive other people, all I have to do is give up hope for a better past. Like, I can do that. And I
Wow.
just feel like when you do that, you arrive at like, oh, here I am.
Oh my
The
gosh,
good, the
Heather.
bad, the unthinkable. I'm here, you know?
You're talking about the prison toolkit, like literally from mindfulness to, acknowledging, noticing, curiosity, to this your response. Like I remember when I first shared my story with you before the TED Talk, and you were that person. You were literally like crying, and I was like, "Why is she crying? It's not that big of a deal." Whereas you're like, "It is a big deal."
A
Like, what are you
lot.
talking about? And like that sense of validation is so important because at that moment I hadn't acknowledged the amount of pain I was already carrying within me. And the listening ear of another really helped me acknowledge that pain and then begin to address it, which was so powerful. um, and also is known as empathy, right? And the role of empathy in this work. um, Amina, like same thing for you. Like, how have you noticed this in your clients, like this battle of victimhood and entitlement? And I loved this phrasing of having been victimized is different from adopting victimhood as an identity.
Yep. Yeah. I love you both so much. This is such a beautiful conversation. I was struck by what Heather said and what you just reflected on it too. I think it's really important that people witness us and that, we find sort of that middle ground of our stories of not fully going to the toxic positivity space of this happened and I'm fine and it's great, or the other end of like, oh, it wasn't even a thing. But I think it is a both and of like when I think about my life and when I did the story mapping with you, Heather, and the milestones that have happened since, it's like absolutely there are things on that list that I wish did not exist. And it's made me the teacher and person and human and sister that I am today. And so like there's both this tension between real grief and gratitude. And it's so nuanced.
Yeah.
And I feel like I see that tension between the grief and the gratitude with my clients as well. But victimhood in the context of our work and sort of jockeying between the victimhood and the entitlement, it happens a lot in the workplace, right? Especially for historically excluded people. I mostly work with women of color, people with disability and occupying other intersections. And so everything from the broken rung where, 100 cishet white men are promoted to manager and only 82 women, or the glass cliff where like if you happen to be a person of color or somebody with a disability or a queer person that makes it through the glass ceiling, you're going to be asked to work in really tenuous situation, not be given resources and be edged off the cliff, or the pay gap or the sleep gap, right? There's all of these ideologies and systems that set people up to be victimized. But then I
Yeah.
think also the choice to recognize that yes, I have been victimized and I'm not going to live in the victimhood.
No, I love that. And thank you for sharing some of the definitions of phenomenon that people with marginalized identities have to experience, within the business world and the corporate sector, which kind of brings me to the big C word that we often don't talk about in these conversations, which is capitalism. And, acknowledging that we're, as a species, right? The other big C word is climate change, climate collapse, which is quite impending based on all the science. And the role of capitalism, our current form of capitalism, right? Which is very kleptocratic. How have you both, because, I just so deeply trust in your work, how have you been able to reevaluate your relationship with capitalism, like the importance of capital in our lives, but particularly as people who are serving the world through this energy of money? And because I feel like that's one of the biggest biases that we have to break within ourselves at this point in our history.
Yeah, I think knowing each other and loving each other and seeing each other is like part of breaking down capitalism and being, it's so intense. It's so intense to watch capitalism just run wild. I live in San Francisco, and my neighborhood is one of the neighborhoods that's been the real testing ground for the driverless cars. And so there's just driverless cars driving around everywhere. And it's just like such a crazy symbol of like, and they even pick people up. You can call them now, they're cabs. And so how strange, like in this time of climate collapse, in this time of worker crises, we are investing all of these resources in creating the one thing that we don't need, which is more cars on the road without even anybody in them, not even going anywhere. And it really makes me be like, it is so urgent. It is so urgent that we don't just turn a blind eye to the fact that like the Lyft driver that's picking us up is making $3 on this ride. Like, it is very important that we listen and understand who they are and why they're doing this, and how this how we can be a part of them getting better pay. And I feel like all over the place, like the world is trying to separate us. Capitalism is trying to be like, don't look at that person. Don't talk to that person. You now order on your phone and then someone just delivers your food while you're on a call. Like, don't make eye contact, And the more that we make eye contact, the more that we understand each other, the more that we hear each other, the more that we refuse to let someone be just a service to us, the better. That's what we need to break down this current iteration of separation. And yeah.
Yes. Amen, Heather. Mic drop. Capitalism reinforces a caste system, and I am a huge proponent for universal basic income. And I think that would support so many folks and create an evenness that we really need. And in my work, I see so much of capitalism causing harm in corporate context, and even people perpetuating those in their entrepreneurial environments. Like, take hustle culture, for example, which was so pervasive in entrepreneurial spaces, right? With the girl boss and tech bro eras. And we saw so many companies co-opting this idea of hustle, but hustle was a necessary tool for survival for historically excluded people, right? Immigrants, people of color had to have 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet because of the wage gap, because they had to often work twice as hard to get half as far. Malcolm X in his autobiography talks about how everybody in Harlem had a hustle because you had to, right? But then we see a lot of corporations co-opting this language and these ideologies and then oppressing the people that do not need to be oppressed, right? So like the Uber drivers that we're talking about. And so this is a type of sort of linguistic appropriation that's happening and causing more harm. And so I think we really need to hold organizations accountable and as entrepreneurs create spaces that are equitable and kind and where we are honoring people, paying them well, understanding what it means to be whole. I think that's a really important way of shifting the conversation there.
So beautifully said. I think kind of seeing one another and really, I think what capitalism does, as the both of you have said, is really separate us and reinforce that separation. But to really kind of begin to acknowledge the humanity and the inherent dignity in every being that we connect with is so important. And, you know, while I was doing my research for the book, one of the things that I discovered is there are so many other forms of currencies that have existed, that have coexisted with capital or money, currencies of kinship, you know, currencies of kindness, of relatability, of so yeah, one of the currencies that I really, really have been leaning more and more into is the currency of kindness. I think both of you have mentioned it. So I'd love for you to reflect on an experience, you know, of kindness that you've recently experienced. You know, what was that like? And, you know, I don't know if anything comes to mind, but, you know, we often look at kindness as like a t-shirt slogan, be kind, right? It's like an order, like you got to just do this because it's the right thing to do. But there's so much that it takes from us in terms of offering it. It comes from that well of love. But yeah, I'd love for you to share, if you can, whoever wants to, an experience of kindness you've recently experienced, or even defining kindness, you know?
I think of my grandma when I think of kindness. I honestly think that Brene Brown might have heard this from my grandma, but my grandma always talked about how being clear was the kind thing. And she always talked about that. And my grandma showed me such kindness over her lifetime in the things that she did to get our family to a certain position. And the school that I was able to go to was a result of my grandma working in such a way and overcoming her own barriers and obstacles. And so like she showed me so much kindness in so many ways. But I really think underneath kindness is empathy, because so much of the time, I think we decide what is kind for the other person. And in that, I actually think that's a little bit oppressive.
Yeah.
Like, I decide what's kindness for you, and I'm going to put my version of kindness on you.
Amen.
And I think that is sort of like non-consensual domination in a way. And so for me, kindness is empathy of like, what does this person need or desire? What will help them? What do they really seek? What will allow them to unfold in a bigger way? And serving that up. That feels really important.
Yeah, I mean, I have to shout out my grandma too, Grandma Bina. She recently died, and she was 100 years old and 63 days when she died. And so I was reflecting a lot on her life. And one of the things that my grandma did that was so impressive was that she would just always look out for what was working, and she would acknowledge people for that. And it was really crazy sometimes, because I would like, okay, at a family gathering, right? We're all cooking, we're all doing our thing in the kitchen. She's cooking, she's working, she's 96 or whatever. She's working harder than everybody in the room. And like say this happened, and it did. One of like my male cousins comes into the kitchen to recycle his can. And she, they open up the trash and they recycle the can. And my grandma, no joke, she looks at him. What I'm thinking is like, hey, we're all working so hard in here. Do you notice that it's all women here? Do you notice that you're letting your 96-year-old grandma empty the dishwasher and you're not helping? That's my vibe. And my grandma looks at him and she's like, thank you so much for coming in to recycle your can. Like, that's so thoughtful. And she's not kidding. It's not toxic positivity. Like, she actually just notices that he made a choice to come in and recycle. And that's the end of the discussion, you know? And, or she'll just be like, you know, that's so nice of you to help that, that person lift their, you know, their bag into the grocery cart. She'll say that to the checker, and I'll be like, that's his job, you know, like, you know, it's just like, but it's, nothing is too small. She really, and she does it all the way through, you know, and it was just, it's an amazing way to live. And
It is.
There isn't really a downside to just acknowledging people for the efforts, small and large, that they're making to make the world run, you know?
I mean, she sounds like a bodhisattva to me from the Buddhist tradition, because, you know, if you probably didn't pick this up, but just hearing that story, your grandma is someone who was liberated from victimhood and entitlement.
Oh,
That's it. That's the attitude.
Oh, I know. And it's so, it's just so amazing because, you know, she was born in 1924. You know, she never really worked. She had 5 kids.
I mean, she did work, but it's not the
Right.
way capitalism defines work. Yes.
Exactly. And like, you know, she didn't get any awards. She was never like in the newspaper, on the news. You know, she didn't write a book. But at the end of her life, like the weekend that we thought she was going to die, we had all just seen her for her 100th birthday, like the month before or 2 months before. People from my cousins from Italy, my aunt from France, you know, Utah, Pennsylvania, every single person dropped what they were doing and got on a plane. And we all were going into her house, and I was there. And my cousins would open the door to her front door, and they would say, "Did I make it?" And I would say, "Yeah, you made it. She's still alive." And they would say, "Even if I just get one more minute."
Oh.
And literally everyone said some version of that when they walked through the door. And I started to think like, whoa, like that's got to be some like master indicator of a life well lived, you know, and something that's so out of like the external norms of success.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's really changed me, seeing that, and made me reflect on my priorities. Yeah.
Well, also the currency, right? The currency under which folks operated with her. It's not about money.
No, it was never, no.
So it's so beautiful. Wow, my heart feels really full. And, you know, it's one funny thing that you both talked about your grandma, because I talk about my my grandma, who passed away in 2016, in the book quite a bit. Yeah, it made me think of little thoughtful ways that she, you know, fulfilled her duty, her job, without any external validation or need for it. And that's like so many of us around the world. So these are kind of the unsung, you know, heroes and heroines of our lives, you know. Well, this has been such a delight. I'd love for you to kind of share any additional words of wisdom. I mean, I feel like there were so many mic drop moments here. I'm just like, wow, like I know that the two of you as brave souls are working deeply to transform yourselves from within, to support others to do the same. And, you know, I feel that the work of breaking biases really starts here. Like the more we break bias here, we can then shift others just by leading by example, and inviting people to do the same. So yeah, any words of wisdom you have as we kind of close our conversation?
this is not, I don't know if it's a words of wisdom, but it's something that has really helped me over the last 2 years. I've started doing nervous system work, and it has helped me in the conversation of breaking bias so tremendously, because I think, especially in the past, when I first realized sort of, you know, about systems of oppression and where I kind of fit with my intersectionality, there was a part of me that was really living into the victimhood, that was like, it's not fair, and all this has happened to me. And with nervous system work, one of the things that I have worked on is to really be in my body in the moment, right? So to be in an environment, to take in the inputs of an environment, and then based on what my nervous system is deducing about the environment, then making a decision about what I want to share or how I want to be, or if my system needs to be in rest and digest or fight or flight. But before that, because I was coming from the space of victimhood, I would often presuppose what those experiences or spaces would look like, and then have an idea of how I wanted to be in the space. And so I think it goes back to your PRISM toolkit, but this work has really brought me into my body to be able to see things differently and for more of what they are, to make a different choice.
Another mic drop.
Yeah, I love that, Amina, and it's just so important to get your nervous system on board. Yeah, something that's really striking me right now, just looking at both of you, it's like, it's so moving to me to be in this conversation with both of you, and you're both, you know, your wisdom is so helpful to me. It's like, God, what did I do to be able to be in this conversation with you two? Like, this is what I want in the world. And something that I think about the two of you is like, you don't have to wait until you know someone to know someone.
Yeah.
Like, when we first met, you know, because of the container that we were in with the amazing Raw Goddess, that like invited us to just like love each other right away and get to really deeply know one another. It's like that has served us so well over the years in terms of staying in each other's worlds, because we love and know each other on a deeper level. And sometimes you've been friends with someone for 20 years and you've never really let them know you, or you know them. And so that, I feel like, is my words of wisdom, is to really allow yourself to be known in your relationships, and open the space to really know the other. And just, the love can be intimidating. Like, it can be like, yikes, I'm not sure I know you well enough to say I love you, or whatever. It feels embarrassing, or, you know, but it's so much better. It's so much better than the alternative. Like, I will awkwardly say I love you if I feel it, you know, after an hour, so much more than denying that to myself.
Yeah. You know? I love you, Heather. I love you, Amina. It's just,
I love you.
It is such a gift to have, you know, friends on this journey of life, you know, who really are bringing their authentic selves to the table, right? And I feel like your example, as you said, Heather, inspires me, and I know it'll inspire so many of our, you know, viewers and listeners to really be vulnerable, to really show up, and, you know, let their truths be their gateway to freedom. So thank you both so much for being here with us. Please, you all follow Heather and Amina. We'll share all the additional resources about their books and the many, many beautiful things they do in the world. Take good care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Love you both so much. This is so heart-filling.
Yay. Thank you.